am still grabbing the link. It says I am live, but I don't see my link, of course, to put it in the event. But I'm so glad that you're here with me, Johnny.
Yeah, I like the music. That worked.
You did like the music? I was like,
Oh, yeah.
He's totally going to make fun of me. You know, we're low budget here, so the free music is what I got. So it looks like we are live and it's working. Let me just throw it in the event so people know that we've actually made it live and can find us pretty easily. So, bye.
And hello to our first comment.
Yeah. Hi, Abu. Where are you from? If anyone coming in could tell us where they're from, I'd really appreciate that. Okay. Let's connect and grow together. Well, I'm all for that. So.
And Catherine's in the house. Dude, people are filing in.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what happens. A couple minutes, people will start coming in. But I am so excited to have you here. I was excited to initially meet you. But it's funny, I do a lot of networking calls, and I, had an opportunity to watch your TED Talk and was so inspired and loved what you had to say that I really wanted to bring your message to the business community. And I thought this was a great opportunity. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, this is, I wish we could have done it on a Tuesday, but I feel like doing it on a Friday is really fitting because at the end of the week, I feel like a lot of people have built up a lot of, the stress and anxiety may be caked on by the end of the week. So I think Friday is a great time to have a conversation around mental health to sort of leave some of that in the week and move into the weekend a little lighter.
Well, yeah. And especially this week, right? This is not an easy week.
Yeah.
And we're going into the holiday season, and that's not easy. For some people, especially in sales and leadership, year end, where, you're trying to make your number.
Oh, yeah.
The stressors right now are huge. So, having a conversation about mental health and sharing your journey, I think, is something that's great. I've seen you, like, you're everywhere, bringing your message of inspiration and hope, which I really appreciate. I shared yesterday that I personally have been going through a tough time. The stressors are getting to me. And I know a lot of people feel like that out there. And so just so happy to have you. Tell us a little bit about you and your journey.
Yeah. So if you want the long version, I welcome people to watch my TED Talk. If you Google Johnny Crowder TED Talk, I hope it comes up. But the short version of it is, so I live in Tampa. I'm 28 years old. If you can't tell, I'm not really from the business world. I grew up playing metal all over the country. And I also grew up with a number of mental health conditions. So growing up, I was in an abusive household, so drugs and alcohol in the home, fairly unsafe environment. And I wound up starting to exhibit symptoms of mental illness years before I was diagnosed. So I was diagnosed in high school formally with bipolar 1, OCD, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive, and schizophrenia. Among, I'm sure there were others that I'm leaving out, but it kind of rocked me because the way that I responded to those diagnoses was, you're wrong, and you're so wrong that I'm going to start taking psychology courses to prove you just how wrong you are. And so I took 2 years of college level psych in high school, and then I went to UCF for psychology, because after 2 years of psychology, it was looking like my psychiatrist was right, and I didn't like that. So I went to college for it to continue to prove him wrong. Turns out he was correct. And it really just completely changed the way I thought about scary diagnosis words like schizophrenia and bipolar. I had to get over those preconceived notions that I had of what those diagnoses looked like. And that's when I got involved in peer support and public advocacy through NAMI. So I was the kid who was afraid of and angry at those terms. And now, 10, 20 years later, however long it's been, I look back and think, wow, my whole job is helping people not be afraid and angry at those terms.
Yeah. So, and there is that stigma and those labels that are out there that, people don't want to, even though they realize they may be struggling or going through a hard time, like accepting it and reaching out to get help. And because of the stigma, because they don't want the labels and are scared of it, right? And even if you do get diagnosed with something, that fear of owning it and owning your recovery and finding what's going to work for you and getting past that anger. So tell me about that.
I think honestly, I wish I could say that I was just so brave and courageous and I just woke up one day and said, I'm going to face this head on. That never happened. I had such a bad attitude. I was so negative, and there was a lot of fear around it. And I think what really helped me was starting to understand the difference between strength and weakness. So I thought that being diagnosed with a mental illness meant that I was weak. I was mentally weak. But I started learning that overcoming that and working through it made me extremely resilient. So the way that I was thinking about it the other day, that actually I wish I thought about this back then when I was first diagnosed and first in treatment. What I was thinking was how much work. So let's say you're in a kayak and it's sort of cruising down this stream towards a waterfall. And you know that if you go off the edge of that waterfall, it's 1,000-foot drop or something. How much strength does it take to just not paddle and just let the water carry you wherever it carries you, versus turning that boat around against the stream and then starting to paddle as hard as you can? What takes more strength? What makes you strong? What takes resilience? What makes you a hero in your own right? It's not saying, well, this is the way I feel, but I'm just not going to do anything about it. It's going to carry me where it's going to carry me. Or saying, I am going to face this head on. I have to do something about it. And I used to think that being in a stream that takes you towards a waterfall makes you weak, and that's not true.
No, it's not at all. It's that adaptability and that mindset that you're going to find a way through it and get through it. And I think it makes it stronger. It's funny. I was on a podcast. No, it was like a live stream like last week where we were talking about culture add versus culture fit. And they said the business differentiator for next year is really adaptability. So they were talking about selling like assessments for adaptability to really measure applicants as to their adaptability quota, like how adaptable are they? And when you share this story, it makes me think of that and how if that's the differentiator, then why is the stigma there? Because that's exactly the type of people you need, the people who are going to have those challenging experiences and be able to thrive and adapt and, work through it. So that's pretty amazing. So tell me how you're handling things right now, right? With everything going on, there's a big push for you with the CARES Act, with the solution that you offer. How are you managing everything personally?
So it has been extremely difficult. I like to think that I'm fairly well adjusted after spending 10 plus years focusing on doing exactly that. But then a year like 2020, I've been out of treatment for 3 years and off medication, all that stuff. And then a month into COVID, all of a sudden I don't have half my coping mechanisms, right? Can't play basketball. The park near my house took down their hoops. So I couldn't even go if I wanted to break the rules. I obviously wasn't going to the gym. I usually play music and go to concerts. Obviously can't do any of that. And so one by one, all of these things that I relied on for balance, like work-life balance, were being stripped from me. And it was challenge enough to make me start going back to therapy. And I actually did PTSD treatment in early, in like spring and summer, because the fact is what was happening was bringing back a lot of memories from my childhood. You're shut in a house, you don't have options. And it was really humbling for me to go from thinking, I got this, I'm bulletproof, to like, oh, just because you were in treatment for 10 years and you were out for a little while doesn't mean that life can't throw you a curveball. So this year I've been focusing a lot on investing in coping mechanisms that may not look like coping mechanisms to other people. So I think one area that people get hung up, especially in a year like this, is we're used to kind of putting our lives on display. When we're out and around other people, we have to put on our happy face. Even in Zoom calls, we can do that. And what I've been trying to do is focus on the things that people can't see and focus on the things that people might not consider coping mechanisms. So just as an example, I'm a car guy. So my sister got me this for my birthday. It's a Lamborghini Sian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's one of my favorite cars of all time. And I have a die-cast model sitting next to my computer. And what that does for me, other people might not think it's a coping mechanism. Other people might not be impressed by it. I don't care. It helps me realize that the world exists outside of this computer. So when I'm on Zoom calls all day, I need a reminder that there is a world out there full of incredible technology and beautiful design. And this year has forced me to invest in little reminders like that pull me up out of the monotony that this year has caused.
Yeah, no, I have a thing like that too. I have my robot tooth fairy.
Oh,
so that's a robot tooth fairy. So
what is it?
Well, my daughter made it. So the tooth fairy, I was really busy. So the tooth fairy, even though she lost her tooth, did not make it one night. And she comes downstairs and she's like, the tooth fairy's not, like my tooth's still here. And I'm like, honey, the tooth fairy, there are like so many kids on the planet. Like, how is the tooth fairy everywhere? Like the tooth fairy just like, there's so much work to do. I, like can't handle it all. I'm sure the tooth fairy will come get your tooth tomorrow night, or tonight. And so she goes to school and she goes into a class where they say, okay, create a robot that's needed in society. And she brings home the robot tooth fairy. Now, I could say, okay, I totally missed on being the tooth fairy, and there's no such thing as the tooth fairy, right? But I'm not alone in this. It's me and my husband. But it reminds me that from even a moment where I forgot to, leave a couple dollars for her tooth, that it sparked that creativity, which is cool because I love that robot tooth fairy. Like it's one of my prized possessions.
That's awesome.
We do have a question from Veronica. She says, do you feel like the term mental health is being thrown around loosely or that people might be abusing the term?
I have mixed feelings about this. So I think that the fact that mental health as a phrase is being brought up more often in conversation is a net positive. However, I do feel that people, so let me use this as an example. So I am diagnosed with OCD. And I don't mean OCD like I'll straighten a painting. I mean, couldn't go to sleep unless the numbers on the clock added up to a certain number. I couldn't step on cracks. I couldn't touch food. I didn't touch a human being for 6 years. So we're not talking like, oh, you straighten something on your desk and you're so OCD. No, I mean debilitating. I could not complete daily tasks. And then I hear sometimes people say, oh, I'm so OCD. Sometimes I just like order my water with no lemon because I'm just like OCD like that. And I just think, wow, that is mind numbing. However, I think there is a key difference between mental health and mental illness that I want to touch on. I think that the more often we use the phrase mental health, we are desensitizing that part of us that rails against it. If I hear mental health and I don't, let's say that never comes up in conversation and someone brings it up, I'm going to tense up. I don't like it. But if I hear it 5, 10, 20 times a week, all of a sudden my reaction doesn't become so visceral. And over time, I start feeling warm enough to it to say, yeah, I guess I'm a little anxious about this weekend. So I think that it's a piece of a long process. The only thing that I don't like related to that, related to what Veronica brought up.
Brought up.
My Lord, I am from Tampa. If you can't tell, I am Southern. The only thing that I don't like around that is when people will say the term mental health and feel like they did it. Like, oh, I hashtag mental health, or I shared something, my job here is done. No, your job here is never done.
Yeah, no, it's more, it takes more than that. Do you think the stigma makes it harder? Because, I mean, we're on LinkedIn Live, right? So we're communicating to the business community. And so this is a platform where, you network with other business professionals. So the stigma, how do you think employers are looking at mental health, and how to keep their employees engaged and healthy from a mental health standpoint?
I speak to a lot of leaders who are confused as to why their employees aren't coming to them with their stress and anxiety, or they're saying, no one said anything to our HR. And that might be because the workplace environment is not conducive for a conversation like that. We work with this one Cope Notes client who purchased a few hundred subscriptions for their, they have like a call center. And so they purchased subscriptions for all of their salespeople. And after a couple weeks after they bought the subscriptions, they hit me up and said, hey, we've only had like 20 people use their Cope Notes subscriptions. And I said, wow, out of like several hundred people, what's going on? Tell me what's happened. They said, well, we basically just said, hey, if anybody wants to use Cope Notes, just walk right into the HR office, tell us that you're experiencing stress and anxiety, and then we will sign you up. And I'm like, well, no wonder. How much of a cornerstone is mental health in your workplace that you expect hundreds of people to feel comfortable walking into an HR building or desk and saying, I'm feeling this and I'm not expecting to be judged in return. Like I think that it is in many ways the responsibility of a workplace to establish a culture that makes it safe for someone to share that and encourages that. But also there's a fine line, because you don't want to become a full-time, your HR lady can't be your therapist,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's purposely choosing to create a safe environment for people to share and opening up opportunities for people to share without assuming more responsibility than you can as a workplace.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a really excellent point. Catherine here said, great analogy with the stream and paddling. Labels and stigma are so damaging. No one judges if you need treatment or for leukemia, which is absolutely true. And she's got some photos at her desk of the beach.
Yeah.
Veronica she said, great answer in regards to my question. She agrees. Then we've got Christina. So many times having mental health issues is linked to weakness, when identifying and coping with mental health is actually a strength. And I definitely agree with that. And that's why I love that stream analogy so much. So you touched a little bit on Cope Notes. I'd love for you to tell the audience how you came up with it. And, that's the part of the TED Talk that I loved the most, was just the difference between what you offer with Cope Notes versus, some of the things that you tried in your mental health journey.
Yeah. So if you can't tell by now, if you've listened to 20 minutes of this and you can't tell that I created Cope Notes because I needed it, maybe we should rewind. But yeah, this was born out of necessity, and kind of like when your daughter created the robot tooth fairy, born out of necessity. And I think the main pattern that I was seeing was the approach to mental health has always been treatment. So instead of prevention. So think about this. Imagine if you only started brushing your teeth after you had cavities. Imagine if you only took your car into a shop after it wouldn't run anymore. So when your maintenance light comes on, you ignore it. When your tire light comes on, you ignore it. When your engine light comes on, you ignore it. And then your car won't move and you get it towed and go to a shop. Most people don't do that. That's what those lights are for. And I think when we look at the mental health care system as a whole, our approach historically has been wait till you're in tragedy, when you are in crisis. Then and only if you choose to reach out, we will help. That there's no wonder this system is failing so many people. So I think Cope Notes is trying to do the opposite. It's saying we are prevention, we are maintenance, we are your toothbrush and floss. Use this just a little bit every day instead of one big time once a month and you feel like you did it, or only coming in after something has gone horribly wrong. We're trying to equip people so that people living with diagnoses and people who aren't, we're split about 50-50 in our user base, can get used to thinking in healthier patterns. And Cope Notes is kind of an illness self-management tool, even for people who aren't diagnosed with an illness, because at the end of the day, you are your best asset. So when something goes wrong in a Cope Notes subscriber's life, I don't want them to think, oh, I need Cope Notes. I want them to think, I know exactly how to handle this because I've been using Cope Notes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. You used an analogy that I really loved in the TED Talk about the Post-it notes, right? And I know a lot of people in sales do this with the affirmations, right? And the Post-it notes. I mean, we've all got them. I've got them in my bathroom. I've got them around my desk. I'm not showing you my affirmations.
Yeah.
But you said something about how after a while you don't see them. That really kind of clicked for me. Because even as I use all my Post-it notes, I've got one here that says, drink water, do not snack. I don't see it anymore. Like it's lost its value entirely. So tell me about that, because I think that's a really important thing to know about.
Yeah. So I thought when I learned about habituation, before I learned about habituation, I thought I was just a brat and I was inattentive. So I would try to, like Jen said, for listeners, I was leaving sticky notes all around my house that would have these notes on them to try to sort of pull myself up out of a negative thought patterns and maybe redirect my thoughts. And I would start to ignore them after just a couple of days. And it wasn't on purpose. They would just like blend into the background. I wouldn't notice them. And I learned about the concept of habituation, which if you're not familiar, it's like your air conditioner or your refrigerator might hum. And if you get really quiet and try to focus on it, you're like, wow, that's been making a sound the whole time and I didn't even realize it. It's because your brain is really, really good at conserving energy and it tries to tune things out if it thinks that you've already processed that information. So if it considers it redundant, your brain is going to just volley that to the side and say, this is unimportant. So problem is, if you set an alarm on your phone at 2 p.m. every day that says, be thankful for, name something you're thankful for, and it comes on every day, after 4 or 5 days, you probably just turn it off and don't even realize it goes off. So it's not because you're inattentive. It's not because your intention isn't good. It's because your brain has evolved over eons of time to be extremely efficient. And if it processes redundant information, it's not being efficient. So it just sideswipes it.
Yeah, no, and I think that, and I've noticed that's what happens to me with my series of Post-it notes everywhere, right? That they've all blend into the background and none of them have any value anymore. And so while they're great, these affirmations, the gratitude journal, I mean, I did an article last month for SaaS Sales IO about, some coping strategies, because salespeople and even leadership go through that emotional roller coaster of sales. Mm-hmm. And, coming up with ways to have a strong mental mindset so that you're not riding that coaster. Like you're just, kind of keep it at an even keel rather than doing the ups and downs. But they happen naturally in life. This week's rough. next week hopefully will be better.
Yeah.
You know, things happen. So we do have some notes here. Yeah, no, I think I covered that. We do have one from Jonathan. So thanks for sharing. Johnny, can you talk about how you present cope notes to people who are undiagnosed or may never be diagnosed, but can just use to self-improve their own mental health? I believe it meant to be a solution for everyone. It is. It is.
Yeah,
So
Jonathan,
I'd love to hear about that.
thank you for picking that up. It's so funny how many people totally skip that part of me speaking about it. They're like, oh, this is for my neighbor, or this is for my sister, or whatever. It's easy for us to just kind of pass the buck, but the best analogy that I've ever used is the toothbrush one. And here's what I say to people. I say, would you consider using a mental or emotional health resource? And if someone says no, I ask them, would you ever look in the mirror and say, my teeth are so white that I'll never brush them? I'll never brush them. I don't need to. They're perfectly white. No, the reason that your teeth are white is because you brush them. And it's the same thing for people who are working out. You don't get so buff that you never have to work out again. There's a maintenance and prevention component there. And I think the same is true for mental health. When I originally created Cope Notes, actually, it was geared towards people living without a diagnosis. And part of the goal of Cope Notes was to help people become more acquainted with their mental health in the first place. Because let's be honest, I wasn't really acquainted with the concept of mental health until I was diagnosed, which means that all the people in the world who have never been diagnosed with a mental health issue, they're probably not super aware of their mental health. And this is meant to be that tool to walk with someone and say, I don't care if you have a diagnosis or not. Are you telling me you've never experienced stress? You've never been worried. You've never been sad or disappointed. You've never felt guilt or shame or frustration. You never worry about finances or your body image or anything like that. That's what you're telling me? Then you need to go to National Geographic and they can dissect your brain, because everybody else in the world feels that range of human emotions.
No, 100%. I agree. We got another comment from Jonathan here. He says, labels really kill everything around mental health. And I agree. I mean, I think the stigma has just become so strong. And while you hear people talking about it more and more, I think it's still this barrier of, when you look at applications and there's that question whether you've had any behavioral things, and it's there. So when it's such a big part of your life, just like your physical health, mental health is everything.
Yeah.
And so ignoring it is not going to really help you.
Yeah, this is why
I'm sorry.
This is just why I do advocacy in the first place. This is why I raise awareness, because right now, so when I tell people I have schizophrenia, they go, well, you had schizophrenia probably, like in the past, but now you're fine, right? You're talking normally, and you didn't raise your voice or slam any doors or anything, so you probably don't have schizophrenia anymore. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, a big part of why I do advocacy is to help people understand that I think if all people understood that diagnoses don't look like the way, like they aren't portrayed in media, like in TV and books and movies, if we learned that, your aunt lives with bipolar 2, I bet you didn't know that because she never told you because she was embarrassed. But if you learned that, then everyone else you met with bipolar, you go, oh, my aunt has bipolar. Do you have 1 or 2? My aunt has bipolar 2. Yeah. We talked a lot about it. Like, all of a sudden there's a connecting point. And I will just say this, nearly half of all Americans, it's like 48 point something %, it's going to be higher than this after COVID, will be diagnosed with a mental illness in their life. Will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. So it's not every other, you're the only person in the room who is feeling it. It's literally, you line up 50 people, every other person will experience mental illness. And people just need to understand that a label doesn't make that person any different from the person they were before you heard the label.
Yeah. No, 100%. Veronica has a question here. So, how do you reinvent or reestablish new processes so that your motivation notes don't become redundant so your brain doesn't push aside or forget about your notes?
You queued me up so well. I don't want this to be a sales pitch, but that is literally what Cope Notes is designed to do. So we are sending randomly timed text messages to people that train the brain to think in healthier patterns. So I would say Cope Notes is probably the easiest way to do it. The hard part about combating habituation yourself is, I mean, think about it. You can't tickle yourself, right? Because some part of your brain knows that it's you who's doing the tickling. And that same thing makes it very difficult for you to surprise yourself with random notes at random times. And that's what Cope Notes is designed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly what it's designed to do, is sort of to bring that, the unexpected that sort of wakes you up. And that's why I saw so much value in it. But additionally, I think it's also just part of one of many solutions for creating that mental strength to get past things, to kind of overcome. Veronica wants to know if you're hiring.
It depends what you do, but maybe.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on with me. I really appreciate it. I think, Cope Notes is awesome. I just so grateful that you are doing this advocacy and sharing this message of inspiration and hope, and really, talking to people about how to create these good, healthy habits. I think that's awesome.
I think as long as people leave this conversation a little bit more open around their own mental health, we should be fine. Because I just want to, this is the last thing I want to say, because I'll get on my soapbox and I don't want to. Anyone who's watching this right now, I just want to make sure that you don't leave thinking, well, now I know a little bit more about my CTO. No. This is about you. If you have a brain inside of your body, everything we've talked about in this conversation applies to you. So don't discount it because you're a caregiver for someone who is experiencing illness. Don't discount it because you've never been diagnosed, or because compared to someone else, your stress level might not be as high as your spouse or your kids or whatever. No. If you have a brain, all of this applies to you, and you should be taking care of your mental health every single day. No matter, I don't care if it's Cope Notes, if it's books, if it's sticky notes for yourself, if it's meditation or podcast, you have to do something every day.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. We do have one more question, if you have time for one more question.
Yeah.
So how can you convince companies that in a time when they're focusing on so many social issues like inclusion and diversity that affect this pandemic, how to be proactive in dealing with employees' mental health? Like sending summer Fridays doesn't quite cut it. So how do you convince them?
Honestly, that is the age-old question of, when I drove I used to have an old Nissan Maxima, and it was a 1990 Nissan Maxima. And that's 2 years older than me, for reference. And that thing was on its last leg the entire time I owned it. And I would go to a shop, and someone would say, hey, if we fix a little thing that's going on with your engine right now, it's going to be $80. If you wait, it's going to be like $3,000. And I would say, well, I don't want to spend $80 right now. You're saying that it's not necessary. Like, if I don't do it, it's not like the car's going to break down today. So I'm not worried about it. And I waited, and we actually had to impound the car. Like, we had to scrap it because the repair, because I neglected it, was more expensive than the value of the entire car. And I look at companies and I think, that's the problem. You can either invest right now, and by the way, investment in prevention usually has a 400% ROI. So for every $1 you invest in mental health prevention, there's a $4 ROI in productivity and engagement return, people being attentive at work, their attendance, low turnover, all of that stuff. So you can either, what I say to companies is, you can invest a little bit now and get a return, or you can wait and have the most expensive problem you've ever realized in your entire career. It's $1 trillion problem, literally, globally. And the last thing I want to say is it's not just financial cost. This is human capital we're talking about. Your company cannot survive if the people you task with running your company are stressed, anxious, they're depressed, those needs are not being met. I can guarantee you, if all you care about is the bottom line, that will be affected by this, but it is not the true cost.
No, and that's such a great point there. We talk, I had Aaron Bell on a couple weeks ago, and we talked about the idea of an infinite mindset versus a finite mindset from Simon Sinek, right? And so the finite mindset is all short term, all the bottom line and the numbers. An infinite mindset is how are you impacting your world around you and your community, and how are you enriching the lives of your employees? What kind of employee experience are you creating to be proactive with, your contribution to society? So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And next week, I've got Christina Finist, and she's going to be talking about, getting everyone on board for breaking the code of your outreach. So it's going to be an amazing conversation next Tuesday at noon Eastern. So thanks, Johnny. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Take care, everybody.